All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I am your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. Very crowded house today. Of course, my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going, Brian?
It's going okay. We have a Brady Bunch episode now.
That's right.
I like it. Happy to be here.
Yes. And a lot to talk about. We're still in PWI 500 season. Last episode, we were dealing with some of issues related to women on the 500 and talk about 250. So definitely wanted to have Kristen Ashly, PWI contributing writer, who very instrumental in putting together 500 as well as 250, and I know has a lot to say about the Vince McMahon documentary, which is going to be discussing. How's it going, Kristen?
Good. Thank you for having me.
It's been too long. You're a hard person to pin down. To get on the show.
My life. I have one of those like normal jobs, like lame normal jobs. So yeah.
Yeah,
I remember those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
lucky.
Somebody who does not have a normal job is our other guest, and Brian. We talked all things 500 in the last episode. One thing we did not get to is the number 500 a wrestler, even though we sort of teased it. So rather than just talk about it, we invited him on. The number 500 ranked wrestler in the 2024 PWI 500. Memes. What's up, man? How are you?
Hello, I'm good. Trust me, I do have a regular job as well. I've just come from that. I am incredibly good, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But I hope you realise you've literally changed my entire gimmick for the next years.
You're telling me that being the number 500 ranked wrestler is not enough to make a living?
Oh, honestly, if I put like 497, it would be like, yeah, but 500, I'm like 500th best wrestler in the world. And like I have a voiceover guy when I'm memes that does my like intro. It's kind of a UFC style ring announcer that plays over the intro. And as soon as I finished 500, I messaged him immediately. I was like, I need you to announce that I'm the PWI 500's 500th best wrestler in the world. And it's a whole thing now. So yeah,
get the t-shirts made. T-shirts.
Yeah. I hit a GTS the other week. Went 500th best in the world. Yeah, it's a whole thing now. It's a whole thing, and it's all your fault. So,
but why don't we talk a little bit about this? Number 500 ranked wrestler. We had Big Dust on the last episode, who's putting together a whole documentary about being 500, and talked to some other people who have held that position. It goes to you this year. Kevin's talked about how historically it's been kind of a fun spot, and with you, I think you fit the bill because before you were memes, or in addition to being memes, you've been Blue Kane and more recently Blue Pain. And Blue Kane is what it sounds like, right? It is Kane with a blue mask.
Yes, of course, I am Blue Pain now for very strict legal reasons, including Blue Pain. I weigh in at 2 cease and desists. And in fact, if you keep an eye on Wet Cake Pro Wrestling from this last week, they do one show a year. It's the most ridiculous show you'll have. But there was the Blue Pain Invitational, which was filled with unfriendly copyright wrestlers. So there was Kurt Benangle, who was there was Prawn Michaels, who was a shrimp dressed as prawn. There was a lot of it. There was Ratista. Anyway, halfway through the match, I hit all the signature Blue Pain, obviously, moves. I don't know where they come from, but I hit all the Blue Pain moves, and 2 policemen came and tackled me and arrested me and took me away for copyright infringement.
So you've actually heard from WWE?
I won't go into huge detail, but I have had 2 official cease and desists from them.
Were you surprised that, is it both? I meant it's kind of a mixed blessing. On one hand, you obviously don't want to be getting any legal trouble.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I meant it's not the worst thing in the world that you're on WWE's radar.
Well, I'm certainly on their legal team's radar. Yeah. Yeah, it was a weird one because like I created this in the pandemic with another wrestler friend of mine, and like we had always found it really funny that people on YouTube and things like that were saying, "Oh my God, there's going to be a Blue Kane, or there's going to be a green one, or there used to be a green one." But you heard all these rumors for years.
That breakdown for Patrick's Day. You get the
and we were just joking about the fact like, oh, Blue Kane would obviously have ice powers. I go on Amazon. I'm like, Amazon sells snow machines for like 70 quid. Obviously, I'm in the UK, so it's pounds here. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I had bought a snow machine. I'd ordered gear. I'd found someone in Vietnam who could make me a mask. And then I filmed a parody episode of, again, this is when we can't wrestle. So we could go to our training school with one other person and do, like, that was all we could do for, what, a year or something. So we go to the training school and film a parody episode of Dark Side of the Ring. About the people talking about when, you know, I had like Vader Scott on there, I had Leva Bates, like a bunch of people just talking about when they met Blue Kane at the time. And he would, you know, do all these things like destroy catering and like just traumatize them. And we posted that along with like an account, and it took off a little bit, did okay. And I was like, any day now I'm going to get a cease and desist. I was like, there's no point like, pushing this hard, anything like that. And I did it at a couple of places, like relatively low key for maybe a year. And then one day I just posted, fear me for I have snowplowers, and suddenly I've got 1 million views and I'm trending on Twitter, and it went insane. And then shortly after that, luckily, conveniently, nobody knew who I was and I was wearing a mask. So it took the WWE a couple of weeks to find me. But they eventually did. And I pointed out that, well, as far as I'm concerned, very obviously, Blue Pain was and is a parody. He's a joke. It's clearly, you know, literally, he hates Red Kane. That's his whole gimmick. He hates Red Kane. But I had a lengthy discussion with them and said, oh, don't worry, I'll change the costume, I'll change the name, I'll do all this. Did that. Then, of course, sometime later, I was wrestling Matt Cardona WrestleMania weekend in Philadelphia in one of the biggest matches of the weekend for some reason. God knows why. But GCW announced me, of course, as Blue Kane, and I saw it, and I went, oh, this is going to be bad. About 40 minutes later, I get an email from WWE sending me another cease and desist. And I'm like, no, this was an accident. It was supposed to be Blue Bear. And like, it took a couple of weeks of resolving it and not knowing if I was going to go to Philly or not, but I did get to do it. I got to do the match with Cardona, and then I was like, it's all downhill from here. Just the PWI 500 to go. And I made it.
Maybe if you tried being Blue Isaac Yankem, you can get away with
it.
You could be a podiatrist, you know?
Blue podiatrist. But yeah, no, Blue Kane has been, you know, I don't bring him out all the time. I kind of, obviously, it's literally a parody gimmick. So if you keep doing it constantly, it'll lose its charm. So I bring it out every now and then for kind of the right moment. Like now, as memes, it's kind of like my version of like the demon for Finn Balor. But so, you know, I've done this a couple of times now where I'm like, you're not getting memes, you're getting Blue Pain, and the crowd like lose their minds because I'm gonna, you know, do this stupid thing that suddenly became literally a global hit for some reason.
So is it your understanding that you're fine as long as you don't say Kane? You could do the suit, the whole thing. It can't be Kane.
Well, so I've changed. So if you look at what the outfit looks like now, like you can see it in the PWI. In fact, I've changed the mask, I've changed the look. Like you'll see now, and obviously it's blue, so that helps. So now it's kind of like an icicle kind of look. Oh my, there you go. Look, see those are cut. Those are supposed to be ice on my chest. I've tweaked everything a little bit. So more of a you know, Blue Pain on Wish kind of character. And it was kind of how will the fans react to this? And luckily they reacted very well. Like I filmed a whole promo. I think it's still pinned to my Twitter profile or X profile, where I'm reading a cease and desist, and I walk through a portal, an ice portal, and I come back out, and I've got all the new gear on, and I changed my name, and yeah, the transition seems to have. Everyone seems to still be like on board with it, which has been really nice. I've got to do some really cool things as a result.
Well, it's great to have you on, and you know, we've talked about it. You know, you name Cody Rhodes the #1 wrestler in the world, and it's cool for him, and it's a thrill. But we're not under any illusions that, you know, these people are going out and celebrating, and it's life-changing stuff. We know it means a lot to somebody in your position or a lot of the other independent wrestlers. And it's one of the cool things for us to be able to give that to someone. So great to have you on. We're going to be talking more about the magazine. And here it is, the 34th 4th annual, I think, PWI 500. You can pick it up at PWI-online.com. Kristen, Brian and I have talked about it. We haven't gotten your take, but what's kind of feedback you've gotten about this year's issue? Thankfully, I'd say I haven't sensed a lot of anger or controversy. I don't think there's been any glaring omissions. But one, I did a podcast last week, the Whip Wrestling podcast, and they told me, "Oh, you missed one big one," and I was like, "Oh boy, who it is?" And they told me Roman Reigns, and it's like, well, I know, yeah, yeah. But that, obviously that was no accident. But what's been the kind of feedback you've gotten, Kristen?
To be honest, I don't get much for the 500. Not that I'm not seen as part of the committee, but typically people wait for the 250 to start sending me hate mail. So I don't get a lot for the 500. I've also curated my timeline pretty well that I don't see a lot of it. I know I saw a lot of just really happiness about Swerve being number 2, frankly. And I don't think anybody was surprised with Cody Rhodes as number 1. So
no.
Luckily I missed all of that.
Yeah. How about you, Brian? And what you've heard? Yeah, I mean, same thing. I mean, I think people, 1, 2, even 3 with Will Ospreay. I mean, I think people feel pretty good about the top 10.
Yeah, and like we were saying too, the Cody Rhodes pick is a pretty solid and easy pick to defend. The only people, like you were saying, the only kind of negativity I got was, which is very easy to kind of, shut down, is Roman Reigns. I have heard that, like, where the heck is Roman Reigns? But then when you say, well, look, the guy didn't wrestle. I mean, we have certain requirements. You have to actually wrestle. It's not just based on strictly on star power in the business and drawing power. It's, if you don't meet a requirement that we have, a minimum, and then they just go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that, and that's the end of that. And that I should just have like a cut and paste boilerplate for that kind of thing. Other than that, no. I mean, it's a pretty solid position, I think. I mean, because you have these two camps now, which seem to be crystallizing now that Roman Reigns is a full-on babyface. And I mean, I'm not going to stir any controversy here to say that he probably is the number 1 babyface, even though he's not the champion. There's this whole thing of now you have to, if you love Roman, you have to hate Cody. If you love Cody, you have to hate Roman. There's these like factions forming now. Like yesterday, there was something that Trick Williams said, which I tweeted on, and I got annihilated, where he said that in an interview that he much more wanted to wrestle Roman Reigns than wrestle Cody one day. And I said something like, well, that may be true, but that you shouldn't be saying that publicly as somebody from NXT, because you're kind of going against what the promotion's trying to accomplish. They're very carefully trying to make sure that Cody doesn't get overshadowed by Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
And, I got destroyed by all the Roman Reigns people, of course, because that's how it goes.
And with Roman wrestling, 3 times a year, you've got a lot better shot at getting a match with Cody than
true. That's true.
Unlikely that he's going to make that one of his matches. But I think the activity thing is really interesting. And looking a little bit ahead to the 250, Kristen, which we've put to bed, and it's ready to go. We spoiler free, we ran into a similar issue with the 250 in that I think a pretty prominent, a notable name did not make the cut, and a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. We actually put together her whole bio with the anticipation that she might, and ultimately she did not. And I'd be interested in your thoughts. One thought I had on this is, should men and women have the same activity standards? Because the one difference is there are a lot fewer spots on the card for women, right? So that's one. I wondered if it really is a level playing field, in that women may not have as many opportunities as men to get those matches in.
I mean, yes, I agree. I would say I think they just need to be booked more. I think if you change the activity requirements, you're going to get a lot of pushback, because we see all the time the women's list should be 500 or they should be combined, which does not work if you think about it. But I think you get a lot of pushback, and I think adjusting it to fit the business is, I mean, I get it, but it's also, we want the business to change, and that's where we kind of, when people talk about, well, why aren't women in the men's list, or not men's list because it's not, but the 500? Well, I mean, it's hard to combine the two because, I mean, how do you? Anyways, I'm slipping over my tongue right now, but no, I don't think it should be changed. I think the business should be changed, frankly.
The other topic, you just touched on it, and Brian and I began to have a conversation about this on the last episode and realized it's probably best to have a woman as part of this conversation. But it's this debate about, women's place on the PWI 500. I think you wrote your take in the magazine noting that fewer women than we've had in the last few years. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? One way of looking at it is that over the years there's become more parity between the two lists, and it does raise the question, should it be a men's list? Should it be the men's PWI 500? And you don't run into these issues as much. The other thing that has certainly been talked about is it just completely co-ed, and it's just the top 500 wrestlers in the world, in which case you'd only have one list, but a lot of people don't make the cut. So where do you stand on that?
So as far as making the 500 a men's list, I don't think that's going to work, because then you have people like Jessica Troy at the time, Delta, all these women who primarily wrestle in open weight, heavyweight champion, divisions for titles. They don't fight a lot of women, period. And they also don't fight for women's titles a lot, or women's divisions. So how do you then, with Jessica Troy, who has beat all of these men and who holds a heavyweight title, then how do you put her on any list if it's just a men's list? As far as combining, I mean, the easiest way to put it is, let's say you have Mercedes and Roman and all of their criteria equal. How do you rank them against each other? Because they've never fought each other. And chances are, well, in these two cases, they've never fought somebody similar. So how do you gauge how they are, physical wise and talent wise? So then you're running the risk of being sexist. Of, okay, who goes above who? So, I mean, you would have to change the entire criteria, but that's not going to work for the women. Then you'd have almost no women on the list because they fight in women's divisions. So it's not, I would love to just combine them, but it just, the way that business is set up, and that's, sounds like a cop-out, but that really is the way it is. The way the business is set up and the promoters choose to book things, that's where we're at. So
PWI 1000, that's what we're left with.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That would give Kevin a heart attack, I think. Trying to do 1,000 lists. That would be crazy.
Yeah. Memes, I'll get your take on this. I mean, working in the independents, where you see more of intergender matches, that kind of thing. Have you, or do you regularly work with women? And what, if anything, do you think their place should be on a ranking of the top 500 wrestlers in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is one of the things I've been thinking while you've been saying all that is some of my personal favorite matches have been against women. Usually when I'm the bad guy, because you can tell such a good story of just like, effectively beating the snot out of this person and them just never saying die against you. And it always gets this audience so hot behind the person you're fighting that I love those like actual visceral reactions you get from the audience. So that's, I mean, intergender and how much they compete intergender is probably something to consider in that list.
Yeah.
It is good to know, though, that officially this year I am better than Roman Reigns. So that is very good.
Wow.
But officially speaking, of course. But I think the other thing to consider, at least, well, obviously, my main wrestling scene is the UK. And in the UK, if you think of the top female wrestlers in the UK, yes, there are less spots for the women, I'd say. But every single weekend, all of the top women will always have a show to be on. They will always be on that. There's probably less opportunity for the people lower down that list, but the top people will have a show every weekend. They'll have the chance to perform, whether that's against other women, whether that's against men, anyone else. Those opportunities are there for the top people. They find the opportunities. They get the opportunities because they're so talented. Like I was, that was one of the things I was looking at when I was looking through the list. I was thinking, I was like, I wonder how many people from the British wrestling scene have made this list. And you know, I had to scroll through, and I think I counted, well, officially, like regularly going on the British scene, I think out of that 500, there's about 16, 17 that wrestle in the UK, and I think about half of those were women.
Wow.
So in that fact, just because of how many fantastic wrestlers there are in the UK, to have made that list boggles my mind anyway. But to see the kind of names that made it in this year was also very interesting for me, thinking about kind of where they are, what they're doing, what I've been doing. And yeah, if there's a PWI 1000 though, it means I'm much more likely to get on the list every year. So maybe.
I watched the other day talking about Intergender Wrestling, Brian, and I forget how I came upon this, but I found a match with Jacob Fatu, who right now has got, you know, the reputation as like the baddest guy in wrestling, a threat to everyone, just vicious, this killer, against, I think it was Masha Slamovich, right? Is that the match, Kristen? I think they did that. And a terrific match, and he held nothing back. I mean, he had the match that he would have with a man, and you know, put her over, not literally put her over. I mean, he won the match, but at the end of the match, got on the mic and really said how she's tougher than a lot of the men he wrestles. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that, you know, and not watching independent wrestling maybe as much as some other people, that there wasn't part of me that's like, oh my God, this is kind of nuts. I mean, that it is sort of startling seeing a guy, Jacob Fatu is no small guy, you know, having his way with this woman and pound, you know, with the chops and you know, Brian, do you think that ever becomes, I don't know if mainstream is the word, because in some places it is mainstream. Does WWE ever get there?
Well, they used to, right? People forget that. I mean, they used to do it. And it wasn't even just China. I think there were other examples too, but China was the primary one. I mean, we saw the McMahon documentary, right? Yeah. Vince and Stephanie had a street fight 6 days before her wedding.
They don't do it at all.
But no, they don't. They don't do it at all.
Like a Nia Jax or anything.
And I don't think
have a man lay a hand on her.
I don't think AEW ever has too. Have they ever done anything like that?
Mixed. They're mixed tag.
But the men and women aren't interacting, right? I would think that because they're the more kind of indie flavored of the two, I would more expect that it may eventually be something that happens in AEW. But the thing is, I guess there are reasons that it doesn't happen that go beyond the reason you described. I mean, I wonder, because I don't know enough about it, but if some of it is a sponsorship concern, if sponsors would complain, especially somebody like a WWE, which is so mainstream. I don't know if that's an actual thing, if it's an edict for that reason, because we know there are so many things that they used to do in the Attitude Era that they won't touch anymore because of sponsors. And not even just you're talking about intergender matches. WWE won't even do any kind of male-female physicality at all, like even any kind of thing.
They'll have the females attack the men,
right? Well, I should, they'll never have men attack women ever, and so I think it's very specific, and when you see it that specific, you know there's got to be hard and fast rules behind it, and there's got to be reasons for those rules. So, I mean, no, I don't think they're ever going to do it. I really don't.
It's so fraught because you deal with issues of, I don't know if political correctness is a word, but sensitivities on both directions, right? So if you have men being physical with women, you're going to hear from a segment of the audience who's uncomfortable about it. If you don't, you also hear from women saying, you know, they're not getting their fair share. Why wouldn't a woman work with a man? Especially in and I wrote about this in the Next magazine, the kind of new breed of female wrestlers, where some of them physically are as imposing and credible as a lot of the men. I mean, you look at Rhea Ripley.
Rhea Ripley could wipe the floor with half the male roster, in a very believable way, because there's also the believability factor, right? I mean, that's a very believable thing. So even if they were to do it, and I'll qualify, I could actually see them maybe eventually doing certain special attractions like that. Like, I really could see them eventually getting to a point where Rhea Ripley has a match with Dominic Mysterio or somebody. I could actually see that happening. I just can't see a regular kind of thing where it's sort of like the divisions are just kind of blended together. I can't ever imagine that happening. Special attraction things like what China did, I could actually see that happening again. In fact, I think even the idea of doing a one-on-one match is more acceptable than the kind of just full-on brutality that, say, you used to see in like ECW or in WWE, where it's just, you know, it's just misogyny. I'm sorry. There's no way to put a finer point on it. It's just trying to please your audience by showing a woman being completely destroyed by a man, and there's no other rhyme or reason or comeuppance. It's just for the prurient kind of enjoyment of a segment of the fan base, and that you want to avoid because that's just gross, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's very specific circumstances where it might fly. I think Rhea Ripley, Dominic Mysterio kind of fits the bill, where you've got the powerful female babyface and sort of the cowardly, wimpy. This is the character. It's no slight against Dominic Mysterio, but you know, that's the character. So people wouldn't want to see her destroy him, as you said again.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say, in line with something Kristen said too, about the idea of how could you possibly combine the lists because of that reason. You know, a Roman Reigns is never going to wrestle a Mercedes Moné, like that kind of thing. And you know, there's different, even if they were to do, you know, more intergender matches, they probably match up wrestlers that are of similar size. And so you wouldn't see matches like that. So I think if it ever came to pass that the list was combined, it would have to, the criteria would have to drastically change. And it would have to become a thing where instead of talking about who wrestled who and who beat who, because many of them will never wrestle each other, it really would have to be ranking the 500 biggest stars in the business based on how big of a star they were. Which I'm not naming any names, but a rival wrestling publication of which I contribute to does that. That's their philosophy, is they have a combined list of men and women. And it's not as concrete, you know, it's much more like gut feeling, but it's who are the top X amount of biggest stars in the business, male or female. I don't think if you combine it, that you can do any more win and loss and who beat who, for the exact reason that Kristen said.
I disagree, and not that I'm in favor of it, because frankly I'm not. But I do think it could be done, and it wouldn't be that complicated, because the reality is that most wrestlers don't wrestle unless each other or even similar opponents. So what you're talking about is a pound for pound list, right? UFC does it, and they've got their rankings for each weight division, and then they have a pound for pound list, which is who is the best, and on any given time it might be one of the smaller weight divisions who is topping the list, or it might be the heavyweight. It's really about who within their division is the most dominant, and you know, I don't think it would be an issue on any given year for a woman to achieve more than a man did, or a man, or vice versa. You know, I just don't think it's nearly it's all that complicated if you stuck with the same criteria, because it really, and actually this is one of the frustrations, is this thought that the list works in that, well, number one would beat number two in a match, and number two would beat number three. It doesn't really work like that. It's about your body of work. And I do think it's easy, not easy, but I think it's doable to compare men and women. But anyhow, we go around all day here. And I'll say it again, go and pick up the PWI 500. Great issue. Maybe our most important of the year, but of course we've got 250 coming up. And just today I was exchanging with Kevin about the tag team list, which we are starting to put together. And you talk about complicated, you know, the issue there is that these teams don't last. It's like, oh, this team was so great, and then they break up, and what do you do with them? So that's a whole other complication with the tag team list. But another big topic of conversation, certainly you want to talk about this week, is the Vince McMahon documentary. I think we've all seen all 6 parts over the last week. I know we all have a lot to say. I will not monopolize the conversation. Why don't I start with Kristen? just for overall thoughts. One thing that I've heard a lot, I don't know if you'd say it's a criticism, but certainly an observation, and one that I share is, and this is the case with a lot of these kind of things, whether it's one of these A&E documentaries or Dark Side of the Ring, if you are a wrestling fan who follows this closely, not a whole lot new here, right? I mean, not a lot that you didn't know. But that said, what was your overall impression of the job they did here?
And actually, so I mean, I didn't start watching until 2013, and I didn't grow. I remember when I was maybe 13, sort of stepping in and then seeing how they were treating women, and then backing right back out. So I didn't grow up watching this. I am not a historian by nature. Warren, my fiance, does all that. I do not. So I actually learned a lot in this documentary, and even just timeline wise, because I knew about most of the stuff. I wasn't very detailed in knowing this, but it was nice to get a timeline, like, okay, now this, because you hear things like the screw job, and then, and he went to WCW. And I mean, it's just, I like that it was set forward for me. I do think that you have to kind of take a grain of salt with these things. It's sort of like reality TV, and that you hear what they want you to hear, and that it's edited. You have to remember this is edited. But just from a strictly, knowledge point, I learned quite a bit. Honestly.
Yeah. I know one thing that everybody was clamoring to see, especially given the time, was how they would deal with the Janelle Grant accusations and that whole case. And they make it clear and emphasized a lot through the episodes that most of this was put together before the allegations came out. That said, what do you think about how they dealt with that? And it was largely dealt with in the last episode.
I mean, I don't blame them for not touching upon it, because like you said, it was all, what was it, like 2 or 3 years they were filming this? I mean, it was all filmed way before. And how do you then tell a production company, you gotta slice all these hours of interviews so you can fit this case in and redo it? I'm sure there's deadlines. I'm sure, I mean, just logistics wise, I don't expect when it's, last minute for them to redo an entire documentary. But I mean, I do wish they would have touched on it a little bit more, because all of the episodes seem to just be a jumbled topics. Yeah. Nothing seemed very clear to me. So I do wish they would have even just maybe done one episode where it was major, Janelle Grant stuff. But it's also really hard to touch that just from a legal standpoint. And I think I read that she had complaints, right? That they kept framing it as an affair. And weren't really addressing it. So that, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I also heard that it was meant to be sort of a Vince legacy doc.
Originally.
And that, yeah. So that too, I mean, they had all these interviews that probably didn't paint him horribly. So how do you then readjust and swivel based on this news? So, I mean, I think they did what they could.
Well, on that, Brian, and I do think it's one of the more interesting things, because we know that Vince has said he didn't think this was fair, that this was kind of a hit piece. Bruce Pritchard is in the documentary saying as much, and I think there's a reasonable debate to be had about how fair and balanced this thing was. The reality is there aren't a whole lot of people saying a lot of good things about him. That doesn't mean it's not a fair and balanced if there aren't good things to be said about a person. I do wonder how much of that existed in everything that they shot and was not included, because one of my big criticisms of the documentary, and I don't know if it's so much a criticism, because again, you can't exclude what you don't have, and maybe it just doesn't exist. But I do think that there was a noticeable lack of these kind of personal accounts of the man outside of WWE. Now, one of the issues might be, and I think they kind of tell this, and people who know Vince McMahon will say this: there is no man outside WWE. This is. It is all consuming. And so that's why maybe you don't have a lot of those accounts. But, Bruce Pritchard touches on his wife had cancer and Vince moved heaven and earth to get her, the best treatment. I don't know how many accounts there are like that. But if there was something else to give you a more complete perspective of who this person was, I would have liked to have seen it.
I think it's very telling to me of a lack of self-awareness that he has, in the sense that he's complaining about it being a hit job and being very negative. And the thing about it is, the documentary was, to me, was fair to him to a fault. I think that the burial of him came from the things that he himself was saying, but he's not aware of how nuts he is. So he thinks he's fine. And he is one of the most catastrophically screwed up human beings in the world, you know. And so to him, it's just, this is who I am. But like Kristen's saying, and I've been trying to say to everybody that's like, whoa, well, they're not going to learn anything from this. I didn't know, blah, blah, blah. People like us, me, you, Al, we are like 1% of the people that are watching this thing. It had 5 million viewers on Netflix in its first week. People will watch what pops up on their Netflix home screen if it's reasonably appealing. And I know about the rest of you, but a lot of wrestling people are having this experience now of like, oh my God, my aunt called me up. My friend from work is like, is this true? Like, I've been having that happen. My dad is texting me like, what the hell? Haven't you been watching this for 40 years? You know, that kind of thing. People don't realize how much people don't know. You think, you know, that's who this is for. This is for the general public at large. Also, even for me coming into it, I'll say a positive about it. Coming into it, knowing a lot of the things, what I found the most fascinating was just the way it was being discussed openly by everybody. To hear Vince talk about himself, which he never does publicly. To hear Hulk Hogan approach the universe of truth at the closest proximity to which he has ever existed to it. To be the most frank I've ever heard, like to admit that he stooged on Jesse Ventura. He's never done that publicly.
Rat.
And there were little, if you really listen, there were little things that came out. Like for me personally, because of the book that I'm doing on Gorilla Monsoon, when he dropped that thing about how Gorilla Monsoon viewed him as a rival and he was correct to view him that way and how the company was going to go to him, my jaw hit the floor and I had to go back and rewind it like 3 different times, because I knew that from all the interviews I've been doing, but that's never been publicly discussed. All he ever talked about is how he loved all these people that were friends with his dad and they were wonderful and they were like father figures. So like those kind of things, Linda admitting that they used the company's own revenue to make the payments to Vince's dad for the company, which is a deal that no other prospective buyer would have gotten, right? And they've never publicly admitted that till now. So there were things like that. But what you were saying, Al, I was desperate for, where's the real person here? Like what I didn't want, and I guess it's because this project started out as a different thing, it would get frustrating to me when all of a sudden it would just turn into like you're just watching like a WWE documentary. Like, yeah, why does the average
versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18? I don't know.
Why is the average Netflix viewer going to care what the hell ruthless aggression is? Right. Or to be honest, sorry, Brett, like the Montreal screw job, like who you're watching that going like, I don't even know what any of this means.
It's the history of WWE.
Right. You want to know about like, what is he like? What does he do when he goes home? Right. They missed a huge opportunity. They just glossed over his whole childhood. Mm-hmm. That's the story. The childhood.
We never heard anything about his brother. You know, right. what that relationship is. They didn't.
Wait, Al. It's all in the book Ringmaster too. If they wanted to, it's right there. They could have got the author. Well, actually, I know the author actually, from what I understand, did not want to participate. But the book exists in the world. None of that research is used. There's so much in that book. It actually tells you a lot about the psyche and the stuff that happened. It's there, but they didn't do any of it. And I don't know if that was a WWE leverage or something, but that was a major glaring omission in this thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit, I don't want to say they kind of like sold a false bill of goods or something, but like it was sold as kind of this peek behind the curtain. And there was some of that. And as I think you touched on, the most revealing and insightful things might have been unintentional, just little things here and there that I think maybe lifted the curtain more than Vince would even have been comfortable with, but he didn't appreciate what it was that was happening in that moment. But his marriage with Linda was hardly explored. They've been married 60 years, something like that.
They've been living apart for years. It wasn't even addressed in the thing.
Well, they touched on the Playboy interview where he talked about having affairs, but that's it. I mean, like, I really want to know more about, like, what is this relationship?
You got the relationship with the kids was fascinating and heartbreaking. There was a lot revealed in the stuff with him and Shane.
Yeah, that was some of the best stuff. Yeah,
things that I knew about from working for them and seeing and hearing these things, but again, never publicly discussed. Talking about the Rita Chatterton and the statute of limitations.
That
line.
Yeah, that might be
that line.
And the thing about, like, the computers in his brain. Like, why did anyone follow up on that? Like, tell us more about these computers in your brain.
Hearing voices.
I hear voices. There may be a third one that's telling you something. Like, we're just gonna move on to the Attitude Era. You know what I mean?
Do you know what the main thing, at least for me, when I was watching, because you already said, it's exactly what I thought was, this isn't for wrestling fans, this is for Netflix viewers. But this is also for Netflix viewers who, in 3-4 months' time, are suddenly going to see WWE Raw is on Netflix. This wasn't a Vince McMahon documentary. This was a WWE preview documentary, and then something monumental happened that it became it needs to be a Vince McMahon documentary now. That's all this, not all this was, because like you say, all the wrestling fans knew exactly everything almost that had gone on. I think it was quite interesting when you just suddenly have Vince go, yeah, there was a story where I was going to impregnate Stephanie, but then we didn't. And him actually saying that, I was like, oh, it's weird that he's actually just saying these things that we've heard for years and years. But that was kind of, and I think the other thing that I quite enjoyed was that really did make me chuckle was Vince being like, it was like, hey, Vince, so Mr. McMahon, Vince McMahon, are they different people? Absolutely different people. And then it just cuts to his family, his colleagues, everyone going, they're completely the same person. They do this. And just every time they would cut to Vince being like, yeah, no, that's absolutely not the case. And then it would cut back to everyone else going, yeah, Vince did that. He did that. He did that. That's
the lack of self-awareness.
Absolutely. That was the thing that really jumped out at me throughout this whole thing. And I kept on thinking, if he had any self-awareness, he would never have agreed to this, right? I mean, like, because if you're aware of what your public perception is as a narcissist, just a bad person, and I do think that is Vince McMahon's reputation, you would have stayed away from this. But the word was that not only did he want to do it, but he wanted them to be hard on him. He wanted them to take on the tough subjects and the tough questions. And I think that was because he didn't, what he thought that would be was, you were really, vicious with your competitors. You were, and he was ready for that kind of criticism, but not like, you're a creep and kind of a pervert and a weirdo. And to me, like, that was one of the biggest takeaways was he's kind of pathetic, right? I mean, like, that whole thing about the computers in his head and what's the other one thinking about now? It's like something sexual. It's like, dude, you're like 80.
You're 80. And when he was, they were like, how would you describe yourself? And he goes, sexually active.
Yeah, it's just,
like, who needed to know this? You're 80 years old. Not to mention, who is that with? Is it Linda? What are we supposed to think about this?
It's just creepy and gross and pathetic. It's not impressive or anything. It's just emasculating. But memes had a good point, and I hadn't thought about it. But does this documentary see the light of day, given that Raw is about to come to Netflix, if it wasn't super clear that they have turned the page and this is not, Vince McMahon's WWE anymore? Because imagine setting this whole thing up and then Raw is on the January, run by Vince McMahon. I mean, that Netflix would look insane for going into business with this guy. Anyway,
I think that's actually one of the reasons why the project was briefly looking like it was going to be killed, because when the stuff first came out about Vince, the immediate response, if you remember, was this documentary has been shelved. And I think it was for exactly the reason you're talking about. But it's so like, how could we show this if we're now going to be like, hey, everybody, it's Mr. McMahon on Raw, you know? But I think once they realized he was fully out, that's when they shifted gears and said, hey, let's take it off the shelf and we could turn it into, you know, a more hard hitting look at the stuff that he did and turn it into something different. Because I think it was going to be killed at one point, you know, when he was still involved with the company, it would have been killed.
Chris, how do you think the existing WWE leadership team, as they are Triple H, lesser extent Stephanie, even though she remains involved, how do you think they come off of this?
Well, there was a time, so when they're talking about women's exploitation and the Attitude and Ruthless Aggression era, and Triple H, when they're interviewing literally everybody, even Trish, Triple H was the only one that says this was inappropriate. We treated women inappropriately, and all the rest of them were like, we took it too far a little bit, or it was the time. So I think, to me, Triple H was honest, with the screw job, with the Kurt and Carl ordeal. I think he came off honest. Steph came off as like Vince's daughter. I think Steph could have gone way harder. And even Shane, if I'm being honest, I was waiting for the dirt, like the real dirt, not, I wrestled with him and he told me to cheat. Because we know that's something, I mean, I could have imagined Vince being just a complete dick, I don't know if I can swear. But I was ready, and I was ready for the dirt with Steph. Because Steph should have some dirt, real dirt. And
she tried to push him out of the company. I mean, there's definitely
waiting for that. And Bruce Pritchard, well, we know who he is, right?
All these people, I don't think anybody, for better or for worse, surprised me with the way they were. Another one that comes to mind is The Undertaker. And I said this about him when and I don't remember what it was. It was WWE that did the documentary. Yeah, it was like the last ride. And how, with all due respect, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think less of Mark Calloway after seeing how much he worshipped Vince McMahon, and how kind of deferential he is to him. And that carried on through here, even when, I'm sorry, I mean, like, I get that the guy is the reason why you are rich and famous and give you your career. But, I think one of the most sober people in this was Bret Hart. And I think Bret's been this way the last few years. He's the only one who doesn't mind saying, this guy is an awful person,
Yeah, I think part of it is like what you say, Al, too. And it's almost like when you're talking about someone like John Gotti or something like that, where it's like, there are people who owe their fortunes to him. There are people who owe their livelihoods to him. For every, 100 wrestlers that he ground underfoot, there's somebody like The Undertaker who would be an old guy bouncing in a bar in Texas somewhere now, if it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
And so you have this split, this kind of loyalty where you go like, this guy made me who I am. He helped me put my kids through school. I wouldn't be living in this big house. I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have that. So that causes some people, I'm not defending it because, but it causes some people to have mixed emotions to say of how far they want to go. I've even put John Cena in that category.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. And as far as Stephanie and Hunter, I got the impression watching this that they have a lot more to say if they could than what they're saying. There was like hints of just, we know he's nuts. We're going to try to.
Hard. I mean, talking about a thankless position. They're still running the company.
Yeah.
But presumably have to have Thanksgiving dinner with this guy.
Right. And especially in the case of Triple H, because, he didn't grow up in the family. I got the sense there were glimpses of it with him where it was like him basically being like, this family is messed up, but I'm in it. So that's it. You could sense like one day there's going to come a time where he may say a little bit more about it than he did here.
Well, there was one other thing that made me personally laugh quite a lot was the constant, through the whole thing, the constant way that Vince would be like, yeah, I was the big victim here, and WCW was so mean to me, and Ted Turner was so, and the government was so mean to me, and I've got it right here on my phone. I've looked it up. I have a certain screenshot. So obviously with this blue pain stuff, like I've just said, I've had WWE's lawyer team come at me and be like, you can't do this, and like in my head I'm like, I probably have quite a good defense here, but I'm never gonna go up against WWE because I don't have the funds to go to court. I'm just gonna be like, cool, take my licks, change my name, all's good. But this is an actual quote from the documentary from Vince McMahon. So he said, and we can, you can replace certain words with WWE and apply it to my situation, I think. So he says, the federal government and the Justice Department can be the biggest bullies. They have unlimited resources. The average person can't afford to buck the government. They just can't. So that's why so many people cop a plea. They wanted me to cop a plea. And I was just there like, I'm really feeling exactly what you're saying, but not quite the way you're seeing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very microcosm of what was with me, but I was like, I'm really, I kind of understand what you mean, but I'm kind of thinking about you, not about the government.
That was another glimpse into him, though, when he was talking about that stuff. He said, where they said to him flat out, like, do you not see, they didn't use the word hypocrisy, but the hypocrisy of you're crying foul about, say, WCW or Bischoff doing this and poaching talent and this and that. Isn't that what you did to everybody else, And at first he starts to sort of be like, well, it was different because of this and that, and they had more money and they had this. And then he literally just comes out and says, yeah, I mean, that's not how I really felt. You just say things like that to make yourself the sympathetic figure. So it's almost like he's saying, like, yeah, I kind of knew that they were giving me the same grief that I gave everyone else. But in public, I have to be the victim of this so that I'm sympathetic. I mean, almost in those exact words is what he admitted in that moment. So that was one of the other little gems that like popped up that he knows he's full of, what.
Yeah.
It's like, almost everything in that documentary, about, you've heard about, you've read about, but it's just the thing that fascinated me the most was just when Vince McMahon's like, yeah, that happened, or yeah, I did think that, but I think it because of this insane reason, or like just him confirming what we've always known was the most interesting part.
And because we haven't heard that much from Vince over the years, they showed like the Bob Costas interviews and every, used to get those every so often. But this probably is the most that Vince has addressed a lot of this stuff candidly. I actually think another criticism, there wasn't enough of him in it. I mean, every episode was, what was it, maybe roughly 45 minutes. If there was, if you did it with like a stopwatch, I imagine there'd only be like 7-8 minutes of actual Vince weighing in on every episode, and a lot of it was really surface level stuff. I do think on stuff that was further in the past, he was more willing to open up, and even I think in a way that he hasn't acknowledged where he whiffed, the XFL and a lot of other stuff. I do think there was some candid, a little more of a candid approach from him as far as saying like, yeah, try that and it didn't work out, kind of screwed up, shouldn't have done that. So I appreciated that, but I actually, I touched on it, but so much of it was just about like wrestling angles and stuff. Right,
wrestling angles. We didn't need wrestling angles.
No. I mean, I think the Brett Screwjob stuff was worth it because I do think that gave an insight to Vince in a way, but Hogan coming back and Skydome and winning over the fans.
That was
10 minutes on that, and
that was a big one for me. Where I was watching that, going, "Why are we talking about this?
Yeah,
is this A&E? Did I change the channel?"
It's almost like the filmmakers were like, "Isn't this really cool?" And like they're sort of learning about this for the first time.
It wasn't. Like I said, this was a WWE documentary about WWE's history, and here's how Vince McMahon influenced these moments we decided to cover. It wasn't, this is what happened to Vince McMahon all the way. Even like in WWE, like they barely touched on him in Austin, for example. They did a bit, but
yeah,
there's certain bits there where you're like, oh, what about like, okay, how about that feud with Zach Gowen or like,
yeah, I thought about that.
Or, you know, like I one of the most iconic Vince McMahon moment I can think of. I think it's in the Zach Gowen match where he just comes up like peeking up from the ring and he's got blood all over his face. And whenever I think of Vince McMahon, I'm like, that's Vince McMahon. That appeared nowhere. Like there's so much of just the character of Mr. McMahon that was either ignored or glossed over to cover the wider arc of WWE.
Yeah. And even some of the character stuff wasn't, you know, they spent more time than I would have on the angle of him getting blown up in the limo. I mean, who cares? You know, it was just a dumb storyline.
And it's easy to say, like, I know, Al, you were saying before in kind of a half joking way that maybe there isn't any more to him than this. Maybe this is all there is. And while I think it's easy to think that, and I do think he's someone that is all consumed by his work, there is a lot more that could be delved into. First of all, even that itself is worth exploring. This is a man who I was told sleeps 3 hours a night. Okay. It's almost like he's like some weird urban legend. Like he's like a Wendigo or something, like all these things about him. That's what I was told. The thing about you can't sneeze around him, how he hates anything that betrays physical weakness in some way. Like, why can't we talk about that? And I've heard, you know, I've interviewed him twice myself, and I got little weird glimpses of things. Like he told me, you know, I asked him like, what was like, do you watch movies? Because there's always that thing about him. Like when Razor Ramon, when they pitched the Scarface thing to him, he thought it was a new idea because he never heard of Scarface, right? And he was like to Scott Hall, like, this is brilliant. Where'd you come up with this? And he's like, did you ever see Scarface? And at that point, he told me that his favorite movie was Bad Santa. Vince McMahon himself told me this. Now, that's very telling. God. Have you ever seen Bad Santa?
Oh, yeah, it's horrible.
And he was just like going into detail about what he liked about Bad Santa, you know, that I guess like, I think it was that Triple H and Stephanie like got him to like, they nailed him to the couch and got him to sit down and watch a movie, and it was Bad Santa. But I mean, like those, and there's been interviews, even that many of us has probably seen with people that worked closely with him over the years, like, I don't know, Jim Ross in interviews, Jim Cornette in interviews, not Bruce Pritchard, he'll never say anything, but like Dick Ebersol, people that have been around him in casual settings that have revealed so much, none of that explored in here, none of it of his personal life in any way. It was very, very weird. It is there if you want to dig for it. It's there.
It makes me think of something, and that'd be interested, and I'll ask, I guess, each of you this. Who are some voices that you would have liked to have heard that weren't in there? And that doesn't mean that maybe they didn't try, but who would have added something? One that comes to mind for me, as far as like a current person, would have been CM Punk, you know, given everything that happened to him. And he's another guy who seems perfectly happy to throw Vince McMahon under the bus now and say, oh yeah, it's disgusting creep. So I think that would have been interested in obviously everything he dealt with. But Kristen, anybody come to mind?
Well, I mean, more women, frankly, but also Wendy Richter. I wish they would have really
there,
really
but not very much. Yeah.
No, because they really talk about how ironic it is that they want to just cover all these events, but they didn't push Vince at all until why she actually left. She's a diva. She didn't want to give company property back. Well, let's ask you why, which is that you weren't paying her barely anything. And so so then you took her titles. So there was no leverage. I wish they would have gotten to some of these women. I don't know if Gail Kim ever would, frankly, but you know, these women who have had, you know, reactions and they've had bad instances and they've been vocal about it. That would have been really good instead of just, you know, Stone Cold or John Cena or Undertaker, who quite frankly are not going to say much, you know, badly about him. So like, and even women talking heads, they exist out there, you know, journalists and
There was, who's the woman? Mazer? She was
Sharon Mazer.
She was good. And I know Medusa said she was asked, but turned it down. How do you think Trish Stratus did?
I was surprised by some of Trish's stuff, especially with the affair storyline. It sounded like something, you know, CEO would say about it. Like, oh, well, you know, we wanted to make you mad. We wanted to get a reaction from you. Like, did you really want this? Because in the beginning, she said, oh, I wasn't really pitched this. It wasn't really pitched to me. but you liked it because it was awful. I was very surprised.
It's like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, the way I took it. Because like even she was saying things that made me, and I don't want to discredit her because, you know, she's entitled to her opinion on it, I suppose. But she was saying things which came off to me like, these are the things they told you to convince you to do this. And now you're repeating it back to us. Like, oh, we did a scene where, you know, that's what they sat down and said to you, Trish, this is like a scene in a movie and it's going to lead to this payoff. Like she was repeating what was told to her, I think, in order to get her to do it.
Yeah. Anybody, Brian, come to mind who you'd like to have heard from?
I was thinking like of people that worked with him in the past. There's a lot of people like, you know, the thing is like, he's an older guy now. So people that knew him when he was a kid and things, there's not really people
are gone, unfortunately.
Those people are gone. His brother even is gone. His mother is gone, you know, but that's what, like I mentioned, Jim Ross, Jim Cornette, those are two people I thought, like JR had a very dysfunctional relationship with him. This weird kind of love-hate thing where they respected each other. It's almost like with Heyman, except I think Heyman maybe is more because he's more like of a brash personality. He stood up for himself more, but like they had this weird kind of codependent professional relationship that I saw a little bit of. And Cornette, just because he does not give a damn and he will say anything, and he's not Vince's big. And I know he gets a lot of hate for that, but he could have been harnessed as a force for good in this documentary because he will say what's ever on his mind. And even on his own show, he said some very candid things about being around Vince that are very telling. But there are also people like Jim Troy who worked with him very early when the company was starting. He's quoted in Brad Baluchian's book, The Six Pack, at length. There's Basil DeVito, who was one of the real early Titan sports executives and things like those people are around. Ed Cohen, unfortunately, is not. But like those people that were there in the early years that were around him when everything was taking shape, like maybe Dick Ebersol, like I mentioned as well. Like people like that, I think would have been very valuable. People that knew him. Like, what about this? Doesn't he have friends? Aren't there any, even childhood friends? Couldn't they have gone to, what is it, North Carolina and found people, anyone that knew him?
No, one that comes to mind, and this might have served a purpose in two ways, and maybe some of it unintended. Donald Trump, right? I mean,
yeah, but what would he add to this, though? Really, think about that.
But, you know, on one hand, I bet Vince would love to have him weigh in, and on the other hand, I bet it would serve the exact opposite purpose that we think it would, right?
You thought there was a lot of BS on it. Now, I mean, you know,
that was, you know, not to get political, but one of my big takeaways are like these two were like the same person. You know, I mean, so much overlap. You know, it was creepy. It's like if you really kind of like dissect either of them, you'd think, oh my God, there can't be another person in the world like this. And there's the other one, and they really are so much alike. Memes and anybody to mind somebody you'd like to have heard of from?
Well, I was just going to say, looking forward to Vince McMahon's presidential run. Then, do you know what? Trump was one that was in my mind because I think it probably ended up being an insane rant. The ones that you touched on a little bit. Like, obviously, we heard from Trish, but hers was slightly more corporate, I guess I'd say, because you know she's still in and around the WWE. I would have liked to have heard from people like Sable, people like Candice Michelle, Dawn Marie. Like there's literally a laundry list of people that Vince has, for storyline purposes, stuck his tongue down their throats. And I'm sure they did not enjoy that. And I would like to know what they really thought about that, what the pitch was, why they did it, if they were happy with doing it. And it was touched on a little bit in the documentary and kind of showed, but you didn't get that, well, I did that because of this, or, oh, I hated doing that, or I felt I had to do that because, you know. So that would have, I mean, it probably could have led to several legal issues, but it would have been very interesting to see.
Yeah, and that's the thing for all, and it did do, you know, I certainly don't want to be overly critical because overall I enjoyed it, and I think I learned a fair amount from it. But make no mistake that there was to some extent that WWE sheen over it, right? Because it is Netflix where WWE is about to air, and Triple H participated. So, you know, if the thought is that this is a completely uncensored, you know, view, it's not. A lot of it was washed over, and I think, you know, that's why I think some of the most effective parts were little moments, words, little reading between the lines. And that's where like the truth almost accidentally came through.
Well, we haven't mentioned it at all, but what was fantastic, I thought, is that they had Phil Mushnick.
Yeah.
Phil Mushnick, if they didn't have him, probably would have been at the top of my list of who they should have had. Because I know a lot of people in wrestling don't like him, you know, because he really came full force for the wrestling business and all this kind of thing. But I think if you're outside the wrestling bubble, like, he was somebody that played a very important role in shining some light on what has been a very seedy business that the general public had no clue about. He is a very important figure, I think. So it was great seeing him involved in this.
Yeah. Chris Jericho is another one that comes to mind. And again, in terms of like a completely uncensored view, you know, Jim Ross is a gimme, right? And I do wonder how much of some of like that politics played in that anybody affiliated, because there are actually a few people in AEW who I think would have a lot to say and would have added something, and obviously none of them were included. So, you know, I guess I'd give it a B, something like that. You know, given the subject matter and the buildup of this 6-part documentary about, you know, the most important figure in the history of wrestling, you're always going to want a little bit more. But I guess it was fine. How about you? Go around with grades. What would you give it, Brian?
Oh boy, we're doing letter grades. That's hard. This is why I'm not teaching right now, is to avoid this. Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could see that B plus, just because here's the thing, and I don't think I said this, but overall, I found it to be an interesting watch. Like, as a docuseries, it's hard to use the word enjoyed. It's like saying I enjoyed Schindler's List or something like that. But like, I appreciated it. It was an engaging watch. Let's just say, like, I was looking forward to seeing the new episodes. It wasn't like a chore. So I guess a B or a B plus, maybe, I would say. Yeah,
and you bring up a good point, because we're just talking about sort of like what was spoken in the content, but a lot of great clips and relevant clips, and they found a lot of good stuff. So they absolutely did their homework. How about you, Kristen?
Oh man, like a B minus. Again, I did learn a lot, and as crappy as it is, but as entertaining it was Vince. Like Brian said, sort of, well, I don't want anyone to know me, but then spends 6 episodes teaching us exactly who he is. Yeah. The tagline should have just been, you know, it's just business, because that was everything. And then you hear him talk about the Owen Hart. Well, the crowd didn't see it. So
yeah.
Goes on.
And I don't know that I had seen this, or I forgot the blood on the mat. Yeah. You know, and I do think that like that's another one of my takeaways is that, and in this sense, it was really effective, is that I do think it helped crystallize how I feel about a lot of these. I mean, the one in particular was the Montreal Screwjob, which Barney touched on. I mean, has now been rehashed so many times over the last 25 plus years. But I don't know why, but this more than most other things, it came away like, that was awful what they did to Bret Hart. Really, really awful. And maybe it was that even all these years later, that there is that complete callousness from Vince, and that's one of the big takeaways, is zero empathy for you know, he thought nothing of, and this isn't just the case with Bret, but this was a story with so many people that were loyal to him, that cared about him, that talked about him being a father figure, thought nothing of absolutely stabbing them in the back. And even all these years later, there doesn't seem to be any of that perspective of like, this was a human being with feelings and a family that you crushed. And his answer to all that, and I think he's proud of himself about it, is like, oh, it was all business. That's it. And up to and including his family, right?
Right. Yeah. And the sad thing is, I think you don't get to be in a position that he's in unless you're like that. and he knew that. And that's the sad reality of it. We can get into a whole other discussion of the nature of business and capitalism and the world. It's like you cannot succeed at the level that he's at without being that kind of person. That's my own personal opinion on that, but that is what it is.
Yeah, and maybe another takeaway because of all that is I think it helps put in perspective how absolutely devastating it's got to be for him now to be on the outside looking in. Again, in as much as like the one thing you really got from this was he doesn't exist outside WWE. WWE is his whole world, and the thought that he was pushed out and now truly by all accounts has no role, and WWE is succeeding in his absence. It's got to be absolutely killing him. Memes, how about you? You know, overall, what was your take? What do you think about it?
So I would say if you're also considering this is probably the last time we will, at least in this kind of context, hear from Vince McMahon. Like I'd be very surprised there's ever more documentaries with him talking about it in the future. I would probably rank this in the C+ to B- area.
Really? Yeah.
Like, you know, there were bit like it wasn't bad at all, but there were, like we said, there's a lot of bits missing. It wasn't really a Vince documentary. It was Vince talking about how the WWE grew mostly. So I think you could have channeled it on a few areas and got a little bit of extra sauce out of it.
Yeah, and I know easy to for all of us to criticize, and I'm sure there were all kinds of issues, obstacles in the way of.
Yes, I'm sure there were a lot of like WWE approving this, approving that,
yeah.
legal. You know, I am sure all of that happened. I'm sure there was probably a cut where a bunch of stuff has been taken out.
Yeah, and as you touched on, I mean, the biggest complication being that this is the home of WWE Raw. You know, in a few months. I mean, so in some ways, like the last platform that you would expect something like this from. Anyway, fun conversation. And anybody want to add anything else on this? Good. All right. All right. So I want to go around the horn here, and Chris, anything you want to promote? You got to be excited about the 250 coming out soon.
Yeah,
right?
Women's 250. What is it? Less than 2 weeks. So again, like he said, PWI -online.com.
It's actually always correcting me that it's not a dash; it is a hyphen.
Hyphen, whatever. Just Google PWI. I am really, I know Al at least knows about who's on the list, and I'm super, super proud of this list. I'm really excited for everyone to see. Yeah, I'm very proud. I had a lot more hand in the list this year, so I'm going to take credit for everything. But I really watch out for that because it's a good one.
Yeah, it's one of the heaviest lifts for me. Not in that I've got that much say in who gets on it, but it's an education for me every year and putting it together because I've got to go find out a lot, and it's fun because learn about different people. Brian, I know you got a lot going on. What do we want to promote here?
I guess I could talk about the book because I finished it. Woo!
Oh, congratulations, bearing the lead.
The manuscript for Irresistible Force: The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon. I finished it 4 days before the deadline, which was September 30th. So the manuscript is now in the hands of ECW Press. They have instructed me specifically to not think about it for a while, to walk away and give myself a break, because then there's the next steps of photography and layout and everything. And I've already gotten the ball rolling on photography because I have tons of pictures from the family. I'm going to try and use as many of them as I can. So, I'm on to next steps with that book. It's supposed to come out next October, a year from now, but I have a feeling, I don't want to jinx it, that it might get fast-tracked.
Great.
And it might come out sooner. I know they're able to have it come out sooner, but I think they want to save it for the Christmas season. So it depends like what their thinking is on that. But I'm very excited about it. Very, very, and especially now because the stuff that even that brief mention in the Vince documentary, it vindicates and validates so much. One of the main points of the book is the contentiousness between Vince Jr. and all the partners like Gorilla, and how it wasn't as friendly and copacetic as people think it was. That's a big part of the book. So that was really validating to see.
Were you done with it when you watched the documentary?
Yeah, I had sent it. So here's the thing. I had finished it. It was so weird, but I said to myself, I'm going to give myself one more day to think about it before I send it in. And that was the day that I started watching the documentary. And I wound up putting one quote in the book, which is the line where he talked about how the company was supposed to go to Gorilla, and he viewed me as a rival, and boy, was he right. You know, he viewed me as a threat, and boy, was he right. I just thought, like, how could I not put that quote in there? It's got to go in there. So that went in, and I kept saying, I was like, don't add more, don't do more, leave it alone, leave it alone. You know, I had to finally just hit send and send it, but it's off.
So what's the process now? When do you expect to hear from editors with notes, with suggestions, all that stuff?
So the next thing, it's in Word forms now. So the first thing that'll happen is they'll go through the Word document and they'll start making like first round changes and things and run it by me, and then I look it over before it goes into any layout. And I have a feeling that'll be before, I think, Thanksgiving. I think. Wow. Because it takes a long time, all these things, because then it's photography, because you can't lay the book out until you have all the photos. So then it's the whole process of acquiring photography. And that's when I'll start badgering Kevin and reaching out to other people and things like that. Brian Last has the old Wrestling Review archives. He's got a huge archive of photos. Yeah, even WWE, you know, if they don't read the book too closely, they might agree. No, because they do. They have been known to do that these days. They do license photos for outside books. So I might use some of their stuff. And then it's the whole going through the layout and everything. So it's going to take a long time still to come. But I have a feeling the next round is going to be probably next month to just start really fighting them. I'm putting my armor on, getting ready to fight over things I need to fight over. I already know are coming with the book, and just we'll see how much resolve I have.
Have you got the topic in mind for your next wrestling book?
Why are you doing this to me?
Percolating in your head, at least.
I had an idea that I was going to do before this, but the pandemic and the supply chain issues killed it. I wanted to do a coffee table book on the history of wrestling magazines, have like a big art, like an art book, and go all through like 50s, basically like the 20th century, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That was like what I was going to look at, and all the covers and all that kind of stuff. So I might try to go back to that. I had an epiphany yesterday which I'm not going to share, for a possible biography of the next person. Because I thought after the Gorilla one, I remember thinking, like, who could I possibly do? Because I like to write about historical figures, but I don't want to write. I don't like to write about obscure people, because I'm an attention hog and I want a lot of people to read my book. I don't want to just write a book about like Jack Pfeffer that I would love writing and 12 people read it. So I thought, well, who could it be? And somebody popped in my head yesterday, and I'm not going to reveal who it is, but
so long story short, Brian will be writing my autobiography.
Blue Kane. I have to say, I forgot before. Have any of you seen yesterday on, I forget what indie it was, there's now Rainbow Kane, otherwise known
as thing that was. Yeah, that was where I actually emerged. They had a face-off with Gangrel, which was sick. That was about a year ago now. But yeah, he calls himself Game.
Game.
The funny thing is, I mean, I imagine they've been influenced by a certain other renamed wrestler. But there are now in British wrestling, there are 2 Games in 2 different promotions, and I'm like, when am I going to wrestle one of these Games? I mean,
yes,
surely something's got to happen with it. But and you know, it's not like I could be like, they stole my idea, because I'm like,
you got to send out this.
So I embrace the multiple Games, and I look forward to hopefully competing against them in a ring one day.
Yeah, I was going to ask at the beginning of the show, Brian, as a resident historian, you know, the parody gimmick isn't all that new, right? I mean, I remember, was it a Macho Warrior Randy Hogan? No, it's Macho Warrior Rick Hogan, right? USWA, which was like and these have been around forever. And I guess for whatever reason in UK they get particular. Maybe it's because you don't get the real ones all that often. So.
The UK became infamous maybe 20 years ago or so, or like early 2000s.
Oh God,
they were having what they call tribute shows, and it would be like random guy Jack Smith is The Rock, and this person is Triple H, and this person is Kane. And I always found that, so of course, when I was posting Blue Kane stuff under the mask as well, I was posting those old posts and be like, you know, it really sickens me when these parody people come in. And it's quite funny because there's a couple of people who I know who, like British wrestling veterans who've been on their shows, who have done these shows way back when, who are now livid about the fact that I've become a parody wrestler.
You want to talk about the legal department? I was working at WWE when those shows were happening, and I remember them going nuts over those things.
Really?
Yeah, where it was just like British wrestlers playing the parts of. And let's not even talk about the fact that the Rock was a white guy in blackface. We won't even. But there was that.
I think genuinely there is space today for. I've pictured this in my mind forever. Just doing a show, and it's called "This Is Just a Tribute." And it's literally like the top British wrestlers, and you go to them like, right, who do you want to be for one night? And it'll be like, this person is The Rock, and Will Ospreay will be Trish Stratus or whatever.
Well, you want to talk about how far the parodies go back? I mentioned the promoter Jack Pfeffer. His whole gimmick for a while was he would have an entire roster of wrestlers who had names that were based on the names of real wrestlers, and it was like his whole gag that he was known for. Like he had like Bummy Rogers and Hobo Brazil. Like he was infamous for this. Bruno San Martino. Like it was partly trying to trick the public and partly a self-aware parody, like an entire card. Lou Kez, just the stupidest
this is kind the thing. Of things. I am fully aware of how incredibly stupid Blue Pain as a gimmick is. Like, it is so stupid, and that's why it works. It has to be self-aware.
It has to be, right?
What I loved was when it took off, there was, and luckily, because I've done the meme stuff, I've had a following for years and years, so I'm very used to the negative and the positive. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be an interesting inbox I've got for a few days. And it was half people going, this is genius, I love it. You know, when are you going to fight the real Kane? All this kind of stuff. And the other people going, why don't you just come up with an original gimmick? And I'm like, I am a blue demon with snow powers who hates the original Kane and just makes ice puns the whole time. Tell me where Kane did any of this stuff. Like, it was really funny just seeing the people who got it and the people who absolutely were just livid about the fact. And they're like, and it made me laugh because I'm under a mask and I'm wrestling every week in this other gimmick that's, you know, it's literally me. And they're like, why don't you get a real gimmick where you actually do a thing? And I'm like, actually, I am doing that. I just can't tell you at the moment. Until I unmasked, of course, because I had endless requests for podcasts and things like that. And I'm responding to people going, I'm so sorry, but I have an English accent. If I speak to you, it's going to completely ruin my entire gimmick.
Another wrestling tradition is having a guy appear twice on a show, once with a mask and once without. I was like shocked when I was older to realize that Daddy Davis was Mr. X.
Mr. X was a lot of people, yeah, a lot of different people.
Yeah, now I see the bite types. I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally Daddy.
People who were setting up the ring and just things like that.
I think I've only done 2 shows where I have appeared as memes and as Blue Pain on the same show. One, hilariously, was the show where the footage took off from, which was a charity show actually, where I competed as Blue Pain against Jerry Bakewell, and then wrestled in the main event, which was a Rumble as memes. And then the other time was at Pro Wrestling East, the show I unmasked. So I came out as memes, did the raffle, and was like, just to let you know, whoever wins out of Blue Pain and Truman Roswell, I'm coming for the title. And I'd spent that show as well, the previous shows, calling out Blue Pain, and then someone comes out dressed as Sub-Zero or something, and I'm like, you know, and that was the gimmick we were going for. And yeah, and then on that same show, I lost the match for the title, and as a result, I had to unmask. So I revealed myself to be memes, and you know, and actually at the last Pro Wrestling show, I won their championship. It was the first show after I'd been named on the PWI 500 as well. So I came out, and it was the ring announcer like, he is the PWI 500's 500 best wrestler in the world, and the crowd just like, it was a proper like proud cheer is the only way I could like say it was. I literally, I stood there and I just felt warm on the inside because I was like, oh, they really recognize this. That's so nice. Which, you know, the way the match went, I got pinned but put my foot on the ropes, which the ref didn't see. Then I brought out my lawyer, who threatened to restart to sue the entire promotion if they didn't restart the match. I, of course, while the lawyer was distracted, then won the match by cheating. And then my lawyer gave me a piece of paper, and I handed the promotion a cease and desist and said, "You're never going to do another show again." I mean, spoiler, we are doing another show again. But I have cease and desisted a promotion officially, and their next show now, which is, I want to say, the 9th of November, is now called East and Desist, and they're pro wrestling. I'm very pleased with that one.
You could also wrestle Mims from the NWA. That might be interesting. Mims versus memes.
So I went full well, not copy. Well, I suppose copyright in that show as well, because when I was unmasking, they randomly started a rumor that I was Maven. So I take off the mask, obviously, and the whole crowd is going, "You're not Maven." So I was like, "My name's Memes, of course." So I was like, "Right, I need Maven gear." So for this big title match, I came out with like Memes designed. The Maven logo designed as Memes. I came out to Maven's theme. I had a custom Tron with the Memes Maven logo, and the crowd, they lapped that up. My one-off entrance as Maven, but the gear I'll be wearing for a long time.
Sounds like you're having a lot of fun. So tell people where they can follow you, where they can book you, where do they get a hold of you?
Oh, well, slide into my DMs. I've deliberately made them all open because that's the easiest place to find me. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, wrestling_memes. You can also find me, oh God, what is it? It used to be Blue Kane, which was super easy, but I think it's like _Blue Pain 69 _ or something. And it's only 69 because I was trying to do all these numbers and none of them were working when I had to change the name. And I went, oh, 69. It went, congratulations. And I was like, oh, that was the joke one. So that might be my Insta though. But if you look up Blue Pain, you know, I appear now. So I'm on Insta, I'm on Facebook. You can find my me page as well, Brother Memo, MEMO, which is related to a time Matt Hardy put me on trial. A
lot of litigation surrounding you.
Oh, that was a public trial in front of an audience.
Litigious wrestler.
Yeah, well, the sentence was that I would be deleted quietly in the back, rather than in public. But yeah, so those are kind of the socials you can find me. And yeah, I've got. I'm taking deliberately taking a couple of quiet weeks off, but you can catch me on the 19th of October for Ultimate British Wrestling, which is my home promotion. So that's always a good one. And you can catch Blue Pain appearing for the first time at United Wrestling, which is on the 27th of October. And that was actually where I brought up earlier that normally I wrestle as Memes, but I was angered into saying that the next person who fought there would wrestle Blue Pain instead. So I'm excited. I'm excited to bring him to United. And then right after that, which is I want to say November 3rd, I'm wrestling where I'm the champion. I'm wrestling for Sacrifice Pro Wrestling, which is a really good promotion that is always good to shout out because every single show they do, none of the wrestlers take a wage. Everything goes to charity, and it goes to a different charity every show.
That's great.
And I'm currently the champion, which is great. And the next show has actually been named after me. So that I found out yesterday. It's called Meme Night, kind of like Moon Night. And there's a very cool poster of me with like Moon 90 eyes. So I was very excited by that poster. So there's a few places you can find me. There's a few places you can watch me. And yeah, you know, if you see any Kane-related stuff, don't tell WWE. And if I'm not on the PWI 500 next year, I'm coming for you all. So,
and of course, you can catch him inside the PWI 500, which you can pick up over at PWI-online.com. Guys, thank you so much. I read this is a lot of fun. We will do it again soon.